so I'm going to show you, I'm just going to work with this guy. I'm going to show you how to build up some bulk, right? And so again, if you're doing a more simple line drawing armature, you can build up bulk however you want, right? Before you get to the plaster. It doesn't always have to just be the plaster wrap. I have extras of these too, so if you are working a little bit larger or you want your puppet to be a little bit more ambitious as far as bulk, happy to kind of supply that. But I'm going to kind of work up some of the middle, and something you can use is just kind of paper and tape initially. Aluminum foil is a good option, basically any recycled material. So then you're basically treating the plaster wrap almost like a surface treatment. So I'm going to kind of get some tape. This is just the tape I had in my studio. I'm going to start to wrap a little bit of bulk. Now, this is going to be a lot more crinkly and weird looking until this tape does not pull or break apart as easily as painter's tape, but just to kind of get a basis, right? It's not perfect. And, you know, we've already done our paper making project, so hopefully that kind of helps. A lot of you have already kind of done something similar where you're using paper in a way to kind of get that bulk that you need. Get a few of these off here. Okay, so I'm going to work on just kind of forming up the leg a little bit. One leg. Now, the tape's the paper that I'm using is pretty thin, like it's just recycled magazine paper. And again, this is a great option if you're not going to have like any of, the wire really showing. If you just kind of made a simple armature and you're like, this is all I really need. I'm not too, if that's the part of the project that you're just not really psyched about. This is definitely an option. You can keep your armature simple before you get to the fun kind of plaster wrapping part, right? Oop, that didn't tape as well as I wanted it to. Just trying to build up some of these sad legs from before. Let's see here. Wrap this a little tighter. So when you're adding bulk too, and hopefully you guys are in the design phase for this, hopefully you really worked on making those kind of three-dimensional sketches and even multiple views of your figure. And we'll kind of go over in class, and I'll post some things to Canvas about developing characters. When you're doing a character too, it doesn't mean it has to be completely from scratch. No. You guys are welcome to illustrate any character that's your favorite, right? So if you have if you're a huge Star Wars fan, which some of you might be, maybe you're trying to make a Baby Yoda, maybe you're making a Mandalorian. It's just all more about the process of kind of developing a three-dimensional kind of figure. So it doesn't have to come from complete imagination, but it can, right? And as you work, maybe your sketches change a little bit. And maybe they evolve over time. I'm just going to kind of wrap this a little bit more snugly, just to kind of build up some of the bulk. Now, with this, maybe I don't want this leg to be here. I want it to be I want it to taper off. And so doing paper or aluminum foil is a good way to kind of get the bulk where you can kind of build up those layers of plaster to kind of finesse it a little more. So this project especially, it's going to go through a super duper ugly phase where it kind of just looks like this hot mess, right? And that's fine, especially if you're doing the more simple armature and you're using these kind of recycled materials to build up the bulk. It's one of those things, it's no one has to know the interior process because no one's going to cut your figure apart. Or at least we hope they won't. You never know. But yeah. Paper is a great kind of alternative to this. And tape. Tape can be your best friend. Obviously, you could use hot glue as well. But you do want something to kind of, be that kind of quick drying, not too messy kind of thing. Just going to kind of rip this off. I need 3 hands. Pull off some more tape. Now, I'm going to do this process again in class. I have a balloon frame armature that I'm going to show you guys. It's I remade one of a nutcracker that I had decorated out of wire. And you can see that that one is more elaborate, right? And so when I go to wrap that one, I'll probably just do the plaster alone instead of building up the bulk here. You could obviously do this, like I'm using recycled materials and we're doing plaster wraps, but you could very well easily do this in like polymer clay, any kind of fast drying or air drying clay. But I like the plaster wrap just because it's kind of a quick, easy, as far as like you just dip it into water, activate it, and it kind of gives it a nice stiff kind of feel. All right, I don't hate it. Here we are. When we get to the plaster wrap too, like once it sets and kind of fully dries, you can wet sand it down. Now, I know you guys have heard me say that like we're not necessarily casting plaster this semester just because, you know, with everything going on, but even the plaster wraps, they're still extremely messy, right? And so you guys can notice I have a scrap piece of cardboard kind of laid down. You'll be responsible for just kind of like making sure you clean up your plaster chaos at the end of each day that you work. So just keep that in mind. It is still really messy. So when you are going to do the plaster wrap, I don't recommend wearing your absolute favorite clothing. I'm going to kind of leave the head for right now, just so you guys don't have to watch a 30-minute video, which I don't make any promises that this won't end up that time frame. When you guys are watching these videos too, remember, like, if you're coming to the in-person instruction, there'll always be the option, like, I'm happy to do it again. So you can always just kind of, you know, pan through, get the information you think you need, and then we'll go from there. Now this looks super duper ugly. I mean, it's blue tape that says blue on it, so, but we're gonna make it pretty. But you can see that, like, benefits to using paper and like plaster wrap is that it's not going to be super heavy in the end, hopefully. Whereas clay, you know, that would have a little bit more like structure and base, that kind of thing. I'm going to kind of form a little ball head here. I lied, I am going to put the head on. Tape's your best friend, especially when you're working on something like this and doing a demonstration. All right. This is haunting, but I like it. I'm liking this more and more. So, you know, simple wire armature building the bulk. You guys can see that I was able to kind of really build up this bulk rather quickly in a good way. You know, is it the most aesthetically pleasing thing in this phase? No, but we're going to work on that part. But I have something, right? And it's a lot more volume and like mass than I had before. So again, paper, tape, you can build up bulk that way, or the alternative is to really just, you know, build up your wire armature to have that more open volume. I realized I don't have any scissors in my studio. So I have an X-Acto blade. So this plaster wrap, I have a cup of water here. I'm going to draw that forward. Move my pliers out of the way. So I'm just going to start basically dressing. Now, this plaster wrap is essentially like what they use for casts. Your plaster wrap is going to be a little bit more craft-like, but this is all this is. So I'm just going to give it a quick kind of cut here. You guys can see how much dust came off the plaster wrap just out of the gate, right? So hence the cardboard. It might be even a good idea, you know, if you're working in class, like wear your least favorite t-shirt or something you can get messy. And so what I'm going to do is I just kind of dip the wrap and it becomes really kind of loose and I can start kind of wrapping. Now I can also dip my fingers and kind of do it that way. So you can kind of wrap more like this. I'll kind of go on this side here. And kind of do it more gently, or you don't have to necessarily dip the whole thing. I like to dip the whole thing. And so what's happening, you guys can see I kind of have like a film. And so it's basically, this material is like plaster particles, plaster dust. We've talked about plaster dust too. Good thing about, you know, us wearing masks is that You don't have to inhale the plaster dust as you're wearing your mask, but this is a good project to wear your dust mask instead of just your normal kind of like pandemic masks. So I would recommend doing that, or just bringing in, you know, your least favorite mask option, or wearing one of the blue ones we have in class. Just because, you know, you might touch your face and then you're gonna have plaster all over your mask. So you can see how much dust this creates and just kind of get an idea of exactly, you know, one of the reasons we're not fully casting plaster this semester. But again, so as I'm kind of working, you can kind of take, and you can obviously do this with a brush. I'm a very hands-on person, so I just cut out the middleman. But you can see that I'm getting like a much kind of smoother finish with this plaster, and you can kind of cut it to shape, right? And so you can build up bulk and kind of layers that way. Now, if there's like a ridge or something, like, you know, maybe I don't like this, I want that to be a little more flat, I can kind of take my piece, kind of do a couple layers at a time, do a quick dip, kind of patch the little gap here, and kind of go from there. It does take a little bit to set, right? So it's not gonna like instantaneously dry. Once it does dry, it will dry fairly hard. So just keep that in mind, that, you know, it will stiffen your figure quite significantly. So you won't, it's not necessarily the best material if you want something posable, that you would want kind of modeling clay that doesn't air dry. Now, this is just like, you know, building up the mass and like getting the figure to kind of be more three-dimensional. But as you're working and you're doing this character design, hopefully you're thinking about the after part, so like painting it, adding maybe even like fabric to it or other materials once you kind of get the structure fully set in, and how everything like color, texture, like how they look can contribute to like basically like character features and aspects, right? So this is looking less bow truckle and more virus-esque, or just like a really kind of bulky, happy creature, but here we are. So dip, kind of smooth out. You guys can see too, like when you smooth out, the little like grid pattern or open holes kind of fades away, which is what you want essentially. And again, you can always do one layer, kind of let it fully set, and then carry on with the second layer. And the best thing about this wrap too, instead of just like casting plaster and building a mold, which we'll probably watch a video too, just so you guys can see that process and how it's done. But this gives you so much freedom just to kind of play around with exactly how you want everything to kind of finish off and look. Whereas, you know, usually I do a relief carving project with plaster, kind of looking at a flat square and be like, so how do I turn this into this, right? So it's a little bit different of a process, but I like this method too, just because it's a little bit more, you can add a lot more detail and specifics like in the wrapping process instead of having to like carve out. And so when this dries too, like if I wanted to sand this down or add more bulk, there's definitely ways to do that, right? So the important thing for this project too is just like working through the phases and kind of spacing out exactly how you want everything to kind of be. You can't get this done all in one day, right? There's a lot of drawing time similar to the paper project, so you just have to be patient and kind of work a little bit at a time, right? And you know, when I get down to like this part, maybe I let this set before I start doing the head. But I'm gonna kind of end it there. You guys can see I have most of the torso wrapped. I have some of the arms. Now these lines too, once they dry, they'll dry hard, where you can kind of see where I've cut like different strips and wrapped them. You can wet sand. So I always want to kind of dampen plaster and sand it, because if you sand it, you get all these fun particles and, you know, it makes a huge mess, and it's just a risk for you, right? Because inhaling plaster particles is a big no-no, right? So always wet sand or kind of, you know, gently carve. You don't ever want to sand a plaster when it's dry like that, unless you have the proper mass and ventilation. But in a nutshell, how to wrap an armature, right? It's a little lumpy and bumpy, but we like it. But yeah, good luck.